Good morning, Trumptopia. This is your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. And today's episode of the Almost Daily Zencast. Strange and unusual days that we are living through, dear friends and listeners. That is the truth. Thank you for tuning in. Today is Sunday, June 14th, 2020. And it is, curiously, the 20th day of National Trumptopian protest demanding justice and acknowledgement of the horror, pain, violence enacted on American citizens of non-white skin color for not only the 213 years the country's been an official country, but the 400 and however many years, or it's 227 years, and I had it just an episode ago, 413 years of madness, because it's been madness. This normalizing the outrageous assumption that violence against people of color is somehow more acceptable and more allowable than upon people in power. And I chose my words carefully, I believe. The most heartbreaking thing I have witnessed in the last 20 days has been the systematic attempt to deny reality. Now, I could be wrong, right? If it was a black bag, black flag, a black bag, black flag, a black flag bag, if it was a false flag operation and somehow the conspiracy theorists that believe in such extreme theatrics are right. And mind you, I say this with the warning that brace yourselves, claims that this most recent shooting is also fake, I bet, are coming. Like, I will not be surprised if that shit gets floated along the social media. And I don't mean to fixate on the wrong problem amongst the myriad of problems. I point that out because a lot of people don't see it and therefore don't understand the level of irrational fear and hate and waffling and lack of engagement and dismissal and denial coming from certain people. And this might blindside folks. This might blindside some folks out there. But believe it or not, I hate to be the bearer of horrific news. There's all kinds of horrible people everywhere, right? And I'm not... I must confess my sin of being guilty in the early days of being an accidental all lives matter respondent. Like, I came at it from the transcendental, esoteric, mystical sense that, like, no matter what is true of our material circumstances, behind all that, there's a unity of consciousness. And that everyone's soul is emanated and brought into existence and is living these individual lives here in the material realm from one unique source. But that doesn't help, right, in the face of lived experience, of lived suffering. And that's the full circle lesson that I think we all have to go through and learn here on Earth if we want sustainable peace, equity, equality, sustainability, and survivability of the human species as one glorious, diverse, multifaceted family of oneness, instead of killing ourselves and each other over ideas and labels, which we are so wont to do at various levels and at various degrees. I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but very recently I had like a sidebar Facebook conversation with someone down a thread of conversation in a little mini rabbit hole of like replies within replies, I think. Sometimes I forget where comments are said and how, and I'm not trolling anybody. I'm sharing my own thoughts that these real life conversations with presumably real life other people vis-a-vis Facebook. Because let's not go down the rabbit hole problem of AI and how much of it is out there already and how much of it is trolling our asses in every which possible direction, because that's a sci-fi version of reality we may not want to invoke, right? Says the person who calls himself a robot from the future, sometimes, jokingly. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's just my brand. It's not what I actually think in reality. I'm just writing a book about a guy who would do that, and so I kind of say it sometimes in real life. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, say no more. And trust me, if I may interrupt myself, trust me, no matter what I've said, you won't be the first person to call me crazy to my face, should you ever have the opportunity to call me crazy to my face, which I don't ever wish, right? But for anyone out there listening who thinks this person is cuckoo, blasé, yawn, whoop-de-doo, of course I am. Everyone is. This world is a merry-go-round of madness that we've all been brought up in, and nobody's version of normal is normal at all, at a really fundamental level, which includes this waffling and pussyfooting around about white entitlement, white guilt, empire, and the true factual history of people butchering each other for money and power. And that is not one-sided, right? Like, all nations, all peoples have had their butcher kings and butcher queens that just like spewed blood across the land to gather the power that they needed to become the one and only true ruler of that nation throughout history. We have been on a meat grinder merry-go-round of butchering ourselves and each other for power and control and profit. And we're fucked up about it, folks. We're so fucked up about it that we are still dealing with systemic violence that is riddled with the simultaneous sort of synchronicitous disease of systemic race hate, racial violence, racism, white supremacy being one facet or one expression of that overall disorder. Mind you, if I may be so bold and to say, hard things that most people don't want to talk about. But there is no way in 2020, in this modern day of truth versus disinformation, which is really what it's become. It isn't, it's us versus them. It's us versus ourselves, yo. We've mind-fucked ourselves as a species into this madness. And I don't mean to say that to critique any one favored enemy in the spectrum of ideology, right? You're listening to a guy who has for a very long time, and in no way, shape, or form is saying it now in some weirdly opportunistic fashion in the middle of this very tumultuous historic moment, that all political ideology has at this point been hijacked and transformed, for better or worse, into some form of political mental slavery. That has been my observation of the world since Ronald Reagan was in office. I've been like a character, like a background character that got cut, like an incidental character that should have been in a couple of chapters of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but was cut. I don't know why. That's the way it feels to me. That's the way my character would introduce himself in the book that I'm writing. Oh, crap, I totally missed 420. That was too loud. Sorry, guys. Wow. I need to edit that out in post. That was way too loud. Because I use my spoon instead of my... I had a spoon in my tea. Instead of my little... I do say, like, oh, God, I apologize to anybody listening. I don't think there's anyone listening live. But holy shit, that was stupid. And must have hurt. And I should be fired. If I was on a real TV, on a real radio show, I probably would get fired for that. But then again, real radio used to get listened to on not headsets, but, you know, big fancy speakers, where you could, like, listen to it low volume but high power. And so, like, that little sound would have been really, really pretty. And not painfully, blood-curdlingly, like, in your ear loud, but just sort of like, ooh, the room tingled loud. Which is what I aspire to in terms of the way I create my content, but is not working out, I don't think. I digress. Hopefully because I had auto-ducking and the limiter on, it didn't go too far off the peak and the peak and, like, hurt anybody. But suffering... Life is suffering. Let's take all the Zen Buddhist and comedy. The Zen Buddhist, is it fair for me to describe myself as some sort of half-assed, has-been, loser Zen Buddhist comic? I don't think so. I don't think comics around the world would take kindly to that. I do try to be humorous. I'm a satirist at best, and they don't go to nightclubs. We're supposed to write eloquent, long dissertations that people read and go, ooh, that does whip some questions into my mind about reality and how it works. For 20 days, Trumptopia, America, those are two different places, the world has clashed intellectually over the living history going on before our eyes on our TV sets and our radio boxes and our interwebs screens and our everything, right? Like, you can't go anywhere and not know that there's a pandemic ongoing, which is in America, in terms of how people are coping with it and how people are talking about it, and how the narrative is being driven also. I'm not blind, I'm not foolish. How the media is playing the card. We're all, like, burnt out and people are rushing to open it back up. And this may not even be the second spike. This just might be the first spike really building because we're dumb and we build a lot of language and ideas around what's going on instead of just paying attention to what's really going on and solving problems because we're, you know, a bunch of talking monkeys that have learned to, you know, build a societal construct which necessitates conditioning, as Confucius pointed out, a bazillion years ago for all of us intellectual critical thinkers. It requires it, no matter how you cut it, no matter how utopian, no matter how delightful, no matter how sane or safe, it requires conditioning because, you know, we fall out of the womb remembering bliss and nirvana and really don't care for all this nonsense when we first get here. And then we start conditioning our brains with language. So we have this crazy clash of ideas going on. And it is a truly epic moment in history, these 20 days in the middle of 2020, which may be ending. If there's anything to, like, archetypical mythological thinking, that, like, we might feel like 20 days is a good whole round number. But the question hangs in the air, and the conspiracy theories fly left and right about, like, what's driving this momentum and who's really planning it. And I don't mean to cast aspersions, and I don't mean to pretend to know, right? I'm just sharing you my reflections on it all, my thoughts on everything I've seen, which is, you know, only a sliver. I don't pretend it to be a whole bandwidth picture of everything going on in the world. But literally, like, in the last 20 days, so much has happened. So much mind-numbing shit has happened that just one of which in 1990 or before, right, in any decade prior to the 90s, would have wrecked a generation worth of politics and politicians and ruined a party and like shut it down and got the party to get the next guy in place. One imagines, one thinks, one hopes, because what Donald Trump is doing is insane. And all of the other things that are going on are also insane. And the outrage has reached an insane level. And I don't mean that in any way, shape, or form dismissive, right? Like, neither me labeling it insane is just like, it's off the chart. I don't mean that it's crazy cuckoo nonsense and shouldn't be believed, or, I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying insane with awe and respect for everything that's going on. Like, we have to. We can't. What's that saying? There's a saying that gets used by certain people, so it's in certain documentaries and it's in certain kinds of it's in certain TV shows. And I believe it gets used in. Yes, I believe someone references it in someone who's being interviewed in the Midnight Gospel. If you haven't seen that, folks, I'm dead serious. Honest, sincere, unmanipulated, genuine, truly from the bottom of my heart and the cockles of my being, go see it if you can. Like, if it were out in theaters, which it should be, I think we should put it together. There's 8 episodes. We should make it into a part 1, part 2, part 3, and release them at the same time the moments we can get back into theaters again. Because I aspire to returning to certain levels of societal functioning in a green, sustainable, disease-free way, with peace and tranquility and safety for all, and equality and equanimity and equity for all, regardless of whatever label. Because labels are simultaneously helpful and also useful for dividing, and often a little bit, I don't want to use the word bad, but like, for as useful as they can be, they can cause a lot of problems, and they can cause us to react in negative ways, depending on how we use them, how we perceive them, and how they are used. That having been said, this moment in history is complex AF, yo. And if there's one thing I've heard being said out there on the streets, by people of color, by people who are allies, by people who are mixed between the two extremes by coincidence, and by, people of all sorts, to put it simply, is that right now we should take the time to listen. And to listen to the African American community about its long-standing grievance, valid, right? And I would add humbly the Native American indigenous peoples community right alongside it, as like, we didn't get here in a vacuum, and Standing Rock wasn't that long ago, and those protests continue to a certain degree, if only intellectually in some places, but also physically and literally in other places and at other points in time, and mysteriously speaking, in other time frames around us. If I can get esoteric as shit about stuff, all of this is valid and true. And I say this, and it is not lost on me that I'm saying this on a podcast, right? Where I get to talk. And for some people, I may not be people of color enough, but I'm not claiming to be, that's a whole tricky, confusing, like, rabbit hole of issues there. But I am the descendant of an oppressed people mixed with the oppression of the oppressive people, right? I am a green card carrying, native born Mexican American, and I consider myself a Mexican American because I believe in America. I believe in the melting pot, the great, like the not racist version of all the aspirational propaganda that we've been fed. Because let's have no bones about it. Everybody got fed a line about America. Now, we can either make that true and live up to it, but we can't if we don't actually also call it out as like propaganda and marketing. The American dream has for a long time already been riddled with flaws, failures, and, dare I say it without pissing everyone off, corruption. And I think that's the growing pains that we're going through, and thus the level of chaos that we're experiencing. That we're literally experiencing acted out in front of us by ourselves, by members. We are all one interconnected spiritual entity, ultimately. And that's not, I don't think, there's so many complex levels of it, right? Like, I'm out there on social media world where you take things in more specific nuggets because you're reading a sentence and responding to it, as opposed to addressing the big picture. But we, as a species, as a community of communities, as a race of many races, if that's a way to try and talk about race in ways that isn't inherently painful or toxic or triggering. We are a human race of many ethnicities. But ultimately, we're all cousins, right? And we need to own up to the flaws and failures and tragedies of our past, not dismiss them or bypass them or pass them off as not our responsibility for having existed. They exist. And the thing is, when one takes a very materialistic, limited, hyper-individualistic point of view, the rationale is sound. No given individual can, in a exclusively materialistic sense, logically be accused of the crimes of long ago. Right? That's unfair, of course. But from a transcendent perspective, from a transcendental perspective, and I don't mean the trademarked fucking transcendental, scammy bullshit hijacking version of that, but the true organic sense, like, the phrase that I was trying to bring up earlier that gets referenced a lot by philosophers and artists alike, meet reality on reality's terms. That's a fucking clusterfuck of crazy reality, because people have guns, and people have power, and people have greed in their hearts, and people have spiritual trauma deep down that does indeed reach back generations. We can't ignore that. That's the ego trap. What gives me hope, and what I want to address today on this episode on the 20th day, without dishonoring anybody that's been the victim of violence imposed by anybody else during this period, which is the really like sick, hard part. That's like, it's difficult to talk about it in a professional way without getting too caught up. And you see journalists, this is why I believe in humanity. Yes, all the world's a stage, but all the world's a stage in the sense that it's, spirit, not a fabricated movie lie. But that's not even the subject I want to talk about. The human species is going through some growing pains as we mourn together, as we unite in questioning the status quo, even if that takes us to silly places sometimes. We're going to rein it back in. There's a lot of disinformation out there, vice-gripping counter-narratives against counter-narratives to make it more confusing. and that shit's real, and I don't know where it's coming from. It doesn't matter though. I'm gonna call, like people are calling it out, and we shouldn't get too hung up on trying to lay blame and stuff, but rather get on to the spiritual work that heals the people that are hurt. And that includes practical, pragmatic stuff like questioning the structures in society, questioning why we fabricate, and this is an age-old critique. Poverty is a manufactured state of being by the act of marginalization, by the system, which we can rightfully call a system of oppression, that creates zones of inaccessibility and zones of accessibility, zones of depression and zones of abundance, and just creates disparity for the purposes of profiting on it. It has been a gnarly 20 days, and we've just been buffeted as a species by more epic, senseless, in my opinion, unnecessary also, quite frankly, shooting of an unarmed black man who, yes, did things wrong. Any two sane, rational individuals can watch that video, as depressing and as sad as it is, and go, he shouldn't have resisted, he should not have reached for the taser, not in terms of, and this is horrible, but in terms of compliance and not triggering the fucked up triggers as we know them to exist in law enforcement the way it works now. Now, there's signs also, conversely, which I take as great, excellent signs. And I'll share them with you because we should not overlook them, and we should not misunderstand them, and we shouldn't dismiss them. I think genuine and authentic people are out there all over the social media and in their real lives having those difficult conversations with themselves, with each other, with their families, with their friends. I feel that. I sense that. Is that bullshit? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think it's bullshit. Could I be getting bullshitted? Perhaps. But I know I myself am trying to have those difficult conversations. In a way, this is my public performative display of what I've garnered by trying to have those kinds of conversations. And that's that there's a lot of well-intentioned people everywhere. Not all of them are even 100% white, right? Like, there's just people who kind of have accepted the status quo. That we live in a world that effectively has been a race war of oppression against specifically black people as the social descendants of the slaves who built this country. And equally, a glaringly horrific oppression of the indigenous Native American peoples that were the original rightful residents of this landmass that a near genocide disenfranchised, and then, the rest of the time that this country has been here, they've just been like, go suck it up in the desert with shit homes and no utilities. As oppressed people. That's oppression, as oppressed people. And we just whitewash that and pretend that it isn't horribly wrong and hasn't always been stupid, horribly wrong, and will continue to always be horribly stupid wrong. And that, yes, that benefits others in a fucked up way. And that, yes, progress has been made. We cannot forget or dishonor that. But it's not real enough progress if these other problems continue to exist that get turned a blind eye, which are inclusive of many, many problems. Immigration is still riddled with corruption. There are still families being separated at the border and children being lost in these detention centers and are getting sick. Immigrants and refugees are being terrorized by the institutions of government. And were so in a much more polite, quieter, not quite as, horrifically way for generations. The thing is, we normalized a normalizing of it, and we wonder why. Inclusive, and this is the sad, disgusting part, that where I kind of have always been the crazy person since long before 2020 hit us all like a fucking shit ton of bricks upside the head, that have been calling out that, like, there's an industry of violence porn, an industry of conditioning us to think of guns as the ultimate of all tools that will solve the problems, because the problems will get that bad. They'll get that scary, you know? And that ultimately that's a profiteering machine. A profiteering machine that I think might trump all the other profiteering machines. And that I'm not against guns. Keep your guns. Just don't let them profiteer on us the way they do. Don't let them fearmonger us into believing that we're going to have to kill each other with guns eventually over all the things we disagree about. Because that's what they do. And then they let it sit like that's never going to really happen. We're not really doing that. We're not really trying to. And then if it never happens, great. They make pretty much a lot of profit from the fear of it and the stockpiling of it, and we get these outbursts, and we get an institutionalized, violence in the police. I'm not trying to explain anything away or accuse anyone of anything or sound like any kind of authority. I'm just sharing with you the shitstorm of thoughts that have been haunting me in the latter half of these 20 days because of this frightening trend I see on social media. That is, get them to argue against each other over masks. Get them to argue against each other over whether or not COVID is real or fake. Whether or not the World Health Organization is just incompetent, a little bit corrupt, or nefarious and satanically corrupt. Get them to argue about whether or not the CDC, ditto. Get them to argue about whether or not Trump, ditto. Insert here this same recipe for disaster, which is get you all to argue about everything along these potentially imaginary lines of argument. Now, if there are talking lizard people, and this is really a computer program, and coronavirus is actually nanobots, and the AI is masterminding it with Satan, and the robots are here already, then chill, because I'm a robot from the future sent here to help from, a time frame not unlike your own, slightly in the future, where we figure some shit out. But if it's not that, and it's just plain old, ordinary, humdrum human beings being assholes to each other, the way human beings are prone to do since Cain killed Abel. Not that I'm a big Bible thumper, but, as I do believe in art that serves as analogy, symbolic analogy for something that is literally true. And I think that the Bible, in its most beautiful aspects, free of the corruption, and if we could reintegrate it with all the lost bits and rejected, erased bits, hello, Mary Magdalene represented, divine feminine and was probably persecuted and tortured in her own way and has a big chunk of story that we're not allowed access to. Because at some point in history, we killed over it and got rid of it and erased it. If we can sort of short circuit that endless meat grinder self-butchering addiction at any point in time, I say to you, friends, it is now. For all the magical reasons that you could imagine it would be now. For all the sane, logical, sociological, economic reasons that you would argue without reaching towards the esoteric. And in the enough's enough kind of way, of as an individual that gets it, let me break it down to you why I speak the way I speak about these subjects. I don't know how clear I've been about it, and if I'm being redundant, I apologize, but this is what Spirit has prompted me to speak. I don't get full mess. I get little prompts. I get little nudges in the right direction, and then I just speak what actually has happened to me, or rather, that which I think I should be saying, based on my real life historical experience in this time frame. As a Mexican American, proud to be, that doesn't want to ruin the system, that isn't a criminal, thank you very much, that passes for white because the Spanish Inquisition wasn't enough and they had to come over and rape this other continent too for profit during a particular stretch of history in which Spain was a global superpower. No offense, Spain. I love you as part of my roots, but also fuck you and your like debt to history for having been this sociopathic that you created your own creepy version of the Catholic Church and then went killing people in the name of God, right? Like, and fuck everybody that killed people in the name of God. Flat out. Full stop. I'm fairly certain, and I could be wrong, knock on wood, I pray to baby Jesus and Mother Gaia that I am wrong. The following cannot be true. I do not think that God... I pray that I am not wrong. Holy shit, I almost prayed the wrong words. I pray to baby Jesus, because I believe in baby Jesus, and I believe in Yeshua Christos as an entity and titular phenomenological experience of the human species, not as a dude that was blonde-haired and blue-eyed and must be obeyed blindly vis-a-vis preachers taking your money, right? Two different things. I don't mean to offend anybody by that. I'm just telling you which one I believe in. Y'all can make up your own mind. And Mother Gaia, like the divine feminine, Mother Earth, this womb, this living place that gives birth to the living flesh that is the vessel for divinity, Yeshua, Christos, and whatever the right title was. To me, this has been lost. I haven't found it yet. I'm sure it's sitting around in some musty old book that no one realizes what it means, and that if you just thought about it hard enough, you're like, oh, that's what that label means. There was a feminine equivalent because there is a divine masculine and a divine feminine, as represented in archetypes like Adam and Eve, right? Like those mythologies are symbols for things that are real allegorically, or that are allegorically real about how the universe works in a way that is not literal. There wasn't literally a Garden of Eden, but in the way the universe works, there is a place that you can very much call the Garden of Eden and a time frame in which that experience was experienced phenomenologically in the way that the universe coalesces into existence. Why is this relevant and or important? Because we kill each other over ideas left and right, not just our skin color, right? And I'm not sidestepping. My whole point is we shouldn't be sidestepping. There's spiritual sidestepping. It's like breaking out all over the internet. It's kind of like, one of the things we're asked to call out about ourselves by Mother Earth. Like, stop in whatever form. Every generation has had its variations. You're supposed to do the work, not just read the meme. There's spiritual work to be done, human species. And each of us has our role in this other event that's got nothing, like literally almost absolutely nothing to do with human history as we understand it, as we experience it, as we know it, and as we pursue it. And that some of the conspiracy theories have got a little bit of meh things going on about that make sense, but really there's a whole nother order to it because it's sort of not been revealed to us yet because we haven't fucking stepped into it yet. We have a function here, and it isn't butchering each other over skin color, political ideology, religious belief. But those are the three things we focus on to butcher each other about historically. And then to complain about getting butchered, and then, and I'm not trying to dismiss anything. I'm trying to speak beyond and then back into center. Here we are in this moment where the auspicious good signs are that real people are having real cathartic events. And I'm going to do a whole episode about that probably tomorrow. But and I see them, right? But I wanted to call out also the craziness, and I see its artificiality. if there is an AI mastermind Satan robot behind it, well then I hope you're listening, AI mastermind Satan robot, and here's two motherfucking double birds right here. Fuck you with my two middle fingers for torturing us this way, because we don't need this. We don't need to shoot each other in the back while running away. You know, and mind you, as a critique for what just happened, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think I deserve to be called a social justice reform advocate. Although in my literary world, I will write that character, and they will speak their speeches, and they will say their things, and they'll pay the consequences for it. And I'll write my literary novellas about that in ways that like I would envision. And I would say that as an advocate for equality, like everything we do is toxic. And we need to sort of stop before we get too far ahead of ourselves. But also, there's growing pains going on right now, and there's a sort of bad mojo. There's a trauma in all of us, in every last single one of us, that we cannot deflect from, we cannot ignore, we cannot say, but it wasn't me. And that we need to step up into and sort of continue to process and work through and forgive and heal through, for there to be really, truly powerful, lasting change. So that we can indeed live in a world where even if you are drunk and fucked up and scared to get arrested and you resist arrest and you run away, you don't get shot in the back. Just for being, black-skinned or African-American or Latino or trans or whatever labels get that extra bit of impunity of from the way the system is now. We can live in a world, and it's not utopian nonsense, right? Because we can live in a world where every human individual sees the divinity inherent in every other human individual. And that truth will set us free once we understand and comprehend and own up to and transmute the lies and generational trauma and spiritual toxicity of all the horrible things that we've endeavored to pretend didn't happen or indulged in and now deny, or, as a species, right? We have to think like a species. Yeah, me as an individual, I don't need to take personal blame for anything but my own personal individual actions. That's great. But will we ever, if historically the group, we just all keep getting away with violence and death and mutilation and oppressing ourselves and each other in a bunch of stupid ways over and over again, as history clearly indicates we have, or else we wouldn't be in this mind fuck moment of historical insanity that we are in right now? Or is that too much to ask? Am I too crazy to be taken seriously? I don't think so, and I don't think Alan Watts would think so, and I don't think whoever the fuck we mean by the Buddha would think so, and I don't think that the person that lived the actual experience that we call Yeshua Christos, I don't think they would disagree. I think that's real. I could be wrong. I think that's real. I think those people, whatever craziness got encrusted onto their avatar of mythology that got corrupted and riddled with lies and turned around inside out and topsy-turvy to be misused to render the crazy world we see now, those folks, I think, did indeed have a phenomenological experience that can be, to borrow and sort of adapt the term, scientifically replicated, right? But we don't bother. Why don't we bother? Because it's just like the third party problem. What's the third party problem? Why can't third parties win an election? Because no one will vote for them. Well, why won't no one vote for them? Because they can't win third parties. That's entrenched thinking in some quadrants, and they don't even question it. It's like it's a logical. Is that a logical fallacy, or is it a logical altruism that turns into truth the more people cling to it? I don't know. Words, blah 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 blah. But there's an organic truth behind words, right? And here's the point I want to get to. I've been rambling for quite a bit. And as always, friends, forgive me for the circular fashion that may not seem to be on point as much as people may want me to sound at first. I frustrate a lot of people because I talk about things in a weird way. But bless their hearts, sometimes they stick with me and they get to an aha moment. They're like, oh, not a bad point after all you're trying to make, Mr. Zeppo. Thank you very much, I say to those people. Those of you sticking with me and continuing to listen to the show, bless your hearts. Thank you. Namaste. And those of you who have been joining me more recently as new listeners, welcome to the madness. What was I going to say? I was going to try to bring it to a final point that's like interesting and magical and brings it all together. I was having a real life conversation recently where we were gingerly talking about all of this. And I think all of this problem, and this is a crazy, wild, people might think it's not relevant, people might think it's insane and pointless and a waste of time to even consider. But I'm deeply troubled when violence and predatory oppression, like when certain things like war, like behavior like that, perpetual war, profiteering on war, get written off. Like that shit gets written off as it's just human nature, man. And I think that it can't be so, not in a normal organic sense. But it might be something we're here to wrestle with. Sometimes I catch myself in moments of like, what the fuck are you talking about, Mr. Zeppo? Because I simultaneously believe in like the esoteric mystery meme that says life is not a problem to solve, but an experience to be lived through. Well, that sucks, right? For a lot of people. Like life sucks to live through. And don't we all deserve to experience a life that doesn't suck so much to live through? And why are some people lucky enough to live a life that doesn't suck so much? And on top of that, the greatest mystery, why is it that it doesn't matter who you are? It doesn't matter what context you find yourself in. We find ways to come up with our own ways to torture ourselves and make our lives miserable on top of it all. Why is life the way we find it? And a part of the recipe, I think, is like learned behavior. As to come full circle, Confucius points out that we need to condition ourselves in order to be functioning members of society. Which means we have to honor and acknowledge that we invent society. Which means in America, in Trumptopia, we need to acknowledge that these outrages, these problems, these cartoon characters of hate that are our politicians, and this two wings, one bird, white hat, black hat, good guy, bad guy, system of oppression that pretends to fight for us, the small guys, while it oppresses us overtly and hijacks our freedom to pursue healthy, sustainable civic organization instead of waste money in profiteering and political ideology, right? That steals our freedom to genuinely and sincerely delve into deep spiritual practice that is healing instead of get indoctrinated into organized religions that ultimately leads to violent conflicts about organized religion, etc., etc., etc. Like, how do we end that vicious cycle, which is why we have systemic, like all of that. I don't think we have all of that because we have systemic violence and racism in our policing, right? We have systemic violence and racism in American policing because in America, the first police were literally the hunters of African American slaves. They would hunt them down and keep them from running away. And that In that capacity, they were trained and conditioned to treat them like objects, to humanize them to the point of not giving a shit. You tried to keep them and return them to the slave owner, but ultimately, like, you could shoot to kill. And it's not that long ago that we literally had licensed black people butchers with guns. It was a real job. And I almost refuse to say the name of it, but and we're having an aha moment, right, in this nation where, like, young people have been painfully aware of it in a way that, like, how have y'all just put up with that history and not done something about it? Because the displaced, it wasn't me, I wasn't there. Like, it resonates with this other theme. This is a nation that is not technically, and by definition, and by the founding fathers' intention, not a Christian nation, that has a huge swath of its population that likes to pretend that it is a Christian nation. And that shit is conflated. Because all the slave owners are good Christians. And so the aggregation of power and the fact that our organized religions were hijacked and corrupt previous to the establishment of this country in a deep, seriously profound way means that, you know, we just inherited all that and we carried it through. And to come full circle, like, all of that negative conditioning lies to you and us, and we all grew up with this. None of us escaped this, right? I don't give a fuck what color you are. I don't give a fuck where you grew up. This is some fundamental, hardcore conditioning that you probably did not escape. And that's that, you know, you are an individual. You are alone in your skin. You only exist inside your skull. And you're number one, and everyone else can go fuck off, because otherwise you're weak and you won't survive. And here's the critical part. Fear death. We all get this fucked up, unconscious, semi-unconscious, and surface conscious fear of death conditioned into us, which is what allows us to be assholes enough to butcher each other. And how, like, the question, and here's where we get to, like, this philosophical diving board. Like, we got to jump off topic, because we ask over and over again, like, why do we demonstrate? Because we demand change. Okay, there's a huge series of logical questions that stem from that. We're demonstrating to demand change. We're protesting, and for some people, in some people's minds, rioting is part of this. Is part of the language of this revolution, because there's argument for it being valid as such. Just like the argument is out there that it's valid to shoot someone in the skull to solve a problem. And the overriding toxicity of it stems from, and here's a crazy thing. Here's where I get crazy. It stems from something deeper and older than even race and race hatred. Although we cannot just reject the history of it, right? The fact of it is, I mean, you can look up authentic drawings from the time, Christopher Columbus skinning native indigenous people alive to get what he wants, because he didn't come here to be friends with anybody. He came here to profiteer on the land at direction of the Queen, in the name of God, no less. And that toxicity stems from what is the big question, right? Like, why, after centuries of fighting against those who think they have the right to destroy others for their own gain, are we here? Why do we still have this problem in so many different ways? Let us not forget, it's easy to fixate, right? And then the narrative gets tunnel vision-y, and then we kind of get toxically burnt out on it. And I don't mean this in disrespect. The sorrow is fresh and new every time someone of color and someone white and someone from the future that's a robot gets killed by the police. And I threw that in for an attempt to be, humorous. But maybe it's not the right way to do it. I don't know. I'm just an awkward Mexican that racist white guys sometimes mistake for a fellow racist white guy, which I'm not, right? And I can tell you firsthand, like the problem is more real than even the thoughtful academics that understand it's real want to acknowledge it, because it's everywhere. And the fundamental thing is, here's where I think it stems from, right? Deep down, and maybe people will call me crazy for this, it stems from the fact that we broke the food chain, the food web, the original order, right? There's all this talk. If you look at racist writings, he talks about the natural order of things. Fuck that noise. White people being better than black people is not the natural order of things. Do you know what the natural order of things is? For millennia upon millennia upon millennia, evolution is based on that which eats. Because, and this is frightening and horrible and disgusting and disturbing and dark if you when you think about it, but life consumes life. And we, the human species, very early on, like as early on as when we had the conflict of Homo sapien versus Homo, the other guys, you know, when we were two variations of people according to that whole genetic line theory, presuming that that's accurate, we tamed the natural world to such a degree that no other creature was our natural predator. No other animal was, you know, it used to be that they would eat us, and then at some point that mostly stopped. And we thought that was great. We thought that was brilliant. And then we proceeded to create, 5,000, 10,000 years worth of butchering each other history for lack of having a creature that eats us most of the time. Like, you know, on the majority scale. And we got neurotic about it. Instead of healing and creating spiritual practices that transmuted all of that fear and rage of being food, right? Because we used to be food, and that would be terrifying and outrageous. We would be outraged, and we would rather, you know, butcher that which would eat us, and then, oh, by the way, it tastes good, so we would eat it, than not. And now that we like factory farm, but not that, you know, it was all one big wallop. It's this 10,000 year history of what have we done to ourselves? What the fuck have we done to ourselves? And why did we keep choosing these lesser of two evils to create this disgustingly toxic system where we sublimated and regimentalized self-oppression as a means to, I guess, unconsciously deal with all that trauma through violence, instead of healing it so we no longer are fucked up about and need to cause violence. Which includes, like, you know, I got another interesting discussion that's going on is there, like, because there's the altruists, and they're all over, they're on all sides, right? That really want humanity to see beyond race. The altruists that show, you know, it's not a new meme, you guys. The two babies, one, you know, dark and black, and the other one very fair-skinned and white, and they're perfectly at peace and capable of loving each other as two human baby individuals, because racism and classism and tribalism and all the isms are not innate when we're born. They just aren't. We teach them to ourselves. And we do it in ways that are bigger and subtler and more sublimated and more complex than we even realize, right? Because they're in our very media, in our way of entertaining ourselves. And we're having a big, shocking surprising awakening of consciousness, of an elevation of consciousness, is probably a more accurate term than awakening. But for some people have been totally unconscious or uninterested in addressing these issues. But we need to dig deeper, in my humble opinion. Because ultimately we will become exhausted, I think, as a species, of aggregate self-violence in whichever direction you want to go. It's going to get old. And we have to, at some point, hit the realization that the most effective way to solve the problems is not to fight with each other about them, but rather to heal ourselves, heal each other, heal one another, heal the species, and inclusively then through the divine act of humble forgiveness and inclusion in the process, heal the worst of the bad guys. Like the most insidiously vile people on whatever team that you dislike, everyone will get healed if we just choose healing as the answer. And it's a crazy... People are like, that's magical thinking, bro. And I'm like, maybe it's what every teaching has always been about, but we're on this dark magical thinking of butchering each other as a better answer somehow. Instead, has it not occurred to us? How has that not occurred to us before? I don't know, but it's occurring to us now. I humbly submit to you. For your consideration, those thoughts and many more. But until I make some more tea and take a break and think about what else I want to ramble about, I'm going to leave it there because I think I've gone in too many crazy circles enough as it is. But before I go, I do want to honor and take a moment of silence for everybody, man. There's like too many names. Generations upon generations of human beings butchering each other. And in this moment in history, just in this 20 days, too many people have been killed, period. Full stop. And it's outrageous that we keep doing it to each other when we don't need to, because we have other remedies at our disposal that might actually build towards a better world. So I pray, as always, friends, and in this moment of silence, I pray for all those who have been struck down. As we move forward through history, pray that we all take the time necessary to attend to our spiritual needs, however we each do that, and that we take a moment to reflect on the bigger picture, not because we're done or over the current set of circumstances, but because we need to always be able to reconnect and remember that the eat, work, entertainment, sleep, eat, work, entertainment, sleep cycle is not the end all be all of reality, and we are truly here to do something much bigger than that, and we should not lose sight of it. And it starts with healing. It starts with healing and addressing the ancient wounds and all the fresh new ones. As always, friends, I humbly thank you, and I say namaste to you. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Thank you for tuning in. I have been your crazy host, rambling my way through all the wild and crazy thoughts in response to the momentous history we're living through. Until next time.
As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily Zencast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.